Hi everyone, welcome to another session from Vogue India and the Natural Diamond Council's Diamond Festival, the online edit. I am Ridhima Sapre, the digital editor at Vogue India. Today we'll be talking about some of the most important and significant pieces of natural diamond jewelry as part of the royal collections. Some of the most incredible jewelry commissions historically have been courtesy the patronage of royalty globally, with Indian Maharajas being most prominent. And we couldn't dream of a better panel to do it with than the one that we have today. I'll take a moment to introduce them. Our first panelist, Amin Jaffer, is the authority on royal jewels. An art historian, curator, auctioneer, author of several books on Indian art, jewelry and cultural exchange. His previous roles have included serving as the International Director of Asian Art at Christie's, and before that as the senior curator at London's V&A Museum. We also have with us Francesca Cartier Brickell, who is the great-granddaughter of Jacques Cartier, the famous jeweler who traveled to India many times in the early 20th century and counted the Maharajas as clients and friends. After discovering a trunk of long-lost family letters in her grandfather's cellar, Francesca left her job in the city in order to research and write the best-selling book about her family, the Cartiers. Since the pandemic began, Francesca has also started a popular bejeweled webinar series that you can catch on her website, thecartiers.com. Last but not the least, we have Radhikaraje Gaekwar from the royal Gayakwar family of Vadodara, who have long been patrons of the arts. She serves as the director of the CDS Art Foundation, along with being a heritage conservationalist, textile revivalist, wildlife enthusiast, history narrator, writer, and public speaker. Amin, Francesca, and Radhika, welcome and thank you so much for being here. Amin, would you be able to share any quintessential characteristics of royal jewelry? Are there any tells in a piece of jewelry when you see it that would characterize it as a piece of royal jewelry?
Well, quality, of course, is something that gives it away. But above all, we must remember that royal jewelry was meant to impress. There's a difference between male jewelry and female jewelry. Male jewelry, the jewels worn by the Maharaja and his male family, was really designed as parade jewelry. It was meant to be seen, it was meant to impress, and it was meant, above all, to represent the richness of the state, the wealth of the treasury. And so it was worn in abundance. Scale is one of the things that tells us that it's a royal piece, the sheer size of diamonds. In certain states, for example, like in Hyderabad, any diamonds above a certain weight that was mined there went automatically to the Nizam. So when we speak of great jewels or great size, that's one of the things that tells us it's a royal piece. And this is manifested, for example, in the photographs we see, in the paintings we see of Maharajas, which is the abundance of jewelry is scarcely imaginable today. You know, as richly attired as anyone may be today, I think it's just a fraction of how richly Indian princes were dressed in former times.
That's very interesting to know. Radhika, can you share any thoughts on this? Like, do you feel like there's been any kind of distinction between the jewelry that your family has had and the other sort of jewelry that you see generally?
Well, like Amin said, that jewelry was meant to proclaim power and prestige, and so the important pieces would be, quickly picked up by the important royal families of the country. So the same way, Baroda had an amazing collection of precious stones, and we had a good collection of diamonds. The triple tier diamond necklace, which is very well known and very much photographed, had some of the three most important diamonds set in it. So yes, there was that I think probably there was this amount of politics within royal families about who backed the better pieces. I'm sure Amin will agree with me on that. But yes, there was this desire to have important stones. Like in Baroda, the desire was to have Golconda diamonds, and that's when the Akbar Shahi stone was procured. So yes, there was this whole element of being part of the shared history of the diamonds or the culture of the bejeweled history of India.
Francesca, while you were doing a research for your book, what were the most spectacular pieces of natural diamond jewelry from Indian royals that you've come across?
Yes, well, I mean, my research I uncovered this trunk of letters in my grandfather's cellar over a decade ago, really, and in that were the diaries of my great-grandfather, Jacques Cartier, and he travelled around India, and he first went there in 1911 at the time of the Delhi Durbar, and that's where he met many of the Maharajas for the first time. And after meeting them, he was asked by many of them to go to their palaces, and he was shown their jewels, because in many cases they wanted many of their jewels to be updated in a more modern fashion, and they were quite intrigued by what Cartier were doing in Paris at the time, which was mounting diamonds in platinum. You know, traditionally, of course, the mounts had been in gold, but they were interested in doing in platinum. So Jack was called to their palaces, and he saw some incredible things. And in fact, in the webinar I did with Radhikaraje a while ago, we showed some of those diary entries, because he actually, in Baroda, his mind was blown by the gems he saw. You talked about the triple tier necklace, and he kind of sketched that, and he marked these famous diamonds that were within it, the Dresden and the Star of the South. And so that was one aspect of him going around and seeing these gems in the Maharaja's treasuries. But of course, the other aspect was then being asked to remount them for the Maharajas. And so there are some incredible examples of that, pieces like the Maharaja of Patiala's big diamond necklace. And as part of my research, I spoke to some of the people who were involved behind the scenes. Like, one of the salesmen was called Monsieur Muffa, and I spoke to his grandchildren, and they remembered their grandfather telling them how he'd been summoned to the Ritz in Paris in like 1925 to see the Maharaja of Patiala, and when he got there, this box had been placed in front of him on a table, and he'd been asked to open the box. And inside were all these crumpled pieces of newspaper, and the salesman was confused and said, "Well, what is this?" And the Maharaja, it was Bhupinder Singh, said, "Well, we'll open it." And so he unwrapped, and as he unwrapped each piece of newspaper, like another gem fell out. He said there were diamonds as big as his thumbnails, and rubies, and all types of precious stones. And he reset that. Well, Cartier reset that into an enormous collection of gems. It took them 3 years, and the most impressive piece probably was this diamond necklace that contained almost 3,000 diamonds, and weighed over 1,000 carats, and was probably one of the most impressive diamond necklaces that Cartier ever created.
This question is for everyone. What are the most unusual pieces of diamond jewelry that you've come across that aren't worn in the conventional ways? For example, kamarbands, or other traditional forms of Indian jewelry that are not necklaces or earrings.
Well, I think that beyond the archives, we see also in photographs. The fact is that in Indian culture, jewels are worn from head to toe. There are really so many forms of jewelry that have evolved over millennia, which we see starting from ancient Indian sculpture. And so, diamonds, for example, and precious stones would have been worn in so many ways, whether in anklets and toe rings, whether in armbands. Shomei, for example, designed for Maharani a shoulder ornament. So it was an ornament to wear on her shoulder that was full of cascades of pearls and diamonds and emeralds. Of course, Bhupinder Singh was one of many Maharajas who had fantastic diamond and gemstone belts. And of course, diamonds were also put on forms of dress, for example, shoes. Maharani Indira Devi of Kuch Behar had Ferragamo make shoes for her, which were embroidered with diamonds and embroidered with pearls. She had handbags with diamonds and pearls as well. And so I think sky was the limit. It was just a question of imagination. I think the Indian princes commissioned gemstones for every possible way of self-adornment.
Radhika, so talking about royal family jewels, could you tell us about how these briefs were given to jewelers? What was the process of commissioning a piece to a jeweler? How were these orders placed?
That's very interesting, and Francesca and I have had a conversation on this when she's been in Baroda as well. And she has beautiful sketches of the Baroda jewels. I think the brief was given that the pieces should not really be cut much to size. I mean, a lot of pieces had to be recut because they were cut in the old style, and they wanted to be polished and be more luminous. But I think there was a lot of sentimentality attached to the stones, about the size of the stone, the caratage, which is why important commissions like with the Cartier fell through with Baroda, because they were hesitant. At least the court jewelers were hesitant that if given to a foreign hand, they will not understand the whole sentimentality and the emotional aspect of the Indian culture of how to handle and understand gemstones. But I think yes, in Baroda the stones were recut, many of them were reset. So there were a lot of repurposed jewelry that was created. There was a full-time a jewelry setup here with jewelers who would be constantly repairing, repurposing jewelry. So it wasn't that once a stone has been set in a particular way, it would never be reset. Same for the Star of the South. It first was in an agate and then landed up in this triple tiered necklace. So there was not that level of rigidity one kind of associates with heirloom jewelry. What do you say, Amin?
I would agree with you completely. And one generation to the next, gemstones were being refashioned, remounted in the latest styles. And this is particularly important for the late 19th and 20th centuries. And, Francesca is a great expert on this, because when European jewelers come to India, they bring the latest technology in mounting using platinum. Platinum is a very, very strong metal, so it allows you to do very adventurous and bold things with gem setting, much more than gold, and also with gem cutting. Even until today, each generation develops more sophisticated ways of cutting gemstones, so that the sparkle that can be realized is ever more shiny, ever more brilliant. And so the idea is that Indian princes were, and they were not alone, it was happening among royal houses in Europe as well, were regularly recutting and resetting stones to be in the latest taste, to be in the latest style, so that they would have more effect. And indeed, we must remember that through the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, Maharajas were going to Europe increasingly with their wives and families, and they were seeing the latest trends, whether it was Art Deco or modernism, and they wanted to be in the latest style. And so this was also a big motivation to reset, and where better than with the great European houses like Cartier.
So we've spoken about, how the commissions were made or the orders were placed. Francesca, could you tell us about what was the process from brief to execution once the orders were placed? What was the process of creating a finished piece for a royal?
Sure. I mean, I think it's really interesting what you were both saying, Radhikaraje and Amin, about the stones like being cut and not being cut, because I think one of the reasons Jack, my great grandfather, got on so well with many of the Indian clients is because he had a great respect and admiration for India and the culture and the history. And I mean, so many of these books behind me are all his. They're all about Indian history. So he often didn't want to kind of cut the stones. He felt that he should set them in a way that really respected their heritage and their history. So I think that's interesting, and I think he took a lot of his ideas for setting, even though he used the more European Western mounts, for example, like platinum. He was often quite true to the Indian shapes, and actually even in the gems he made for his Western clients, he many of them were very inspired by India. But in terms of the process, so basically there would be that the designer would speak, or my great grandfather or whoever would speak to the client, the Maharaja, work out what they wanted, and then come up with several designs. And sometimes my great grandfather would sketch the initial designs, as he did in Baroda on that first trip. And then once the kind of original sketches had been discussed and the final one had been chosen, then a designer would sketch up 3 or 4 examples of that life size and paint them. So The client could get a really good sense, and if it was an important piece, they'd even make up a model of it, and then it would be sent to the craftsmen, the mounters and the setters. But it did get complicated, I think, in some cases where sometimes the Maharajas, like I mentioned, like Maharaja of Patiala would bring his gems over to Paris and say, here you go, work your magic. But sometimes they would say, well, no, we want to keep our gems in India. They're too valuable to ship over to you. So then they had to make little models of each gemstone and send back the plaster cast model of the exact size, and then make up the mount in England with that plaster cast model, then send that back and realize it didn't quite fit. And then, it would go back and forth and take months and months, and the craftsmen were kind of traveling overseas, and there were no planes then. It was a long process. I think when you realize how much work went into each individual piece, it's quite staggering, really.
Amin, could you tell us a bit about your process of curating and researching jewelry?
Well, it's interesting. There's like with a book project or any research project, there's a certain amount of good luck and serendipity that you hope to have as you develop. But my work has been led in different ways. It's been partly image led. So, looking at images of royalty over the years and trying to identify and find pieces, you start the ball rolling. The other way is actually to go to archives. So I've spent a lot of time, in fact, with Cartier, with Chaumet, with Van Cleef, with all of the big houses, trying to look at their original designs. And then indeed working as much as possible with collectors, with owners, with royal families, listening to stories and accounts, and trying to find old letters and old inventories and old wills. And, one uses every single approach that one can to piece together what are very often fascinating puzzles and mysteries that Radhika and I have discussed a little bit, that with many friends, what happened to this, what could have happened to that. It's really like almost like a detective case. And then over years, you start to develop archives. Luckily now, because of technology, we're able to search and retrieve information very easily around the world, from big archives, from libraries, etc. The big luxury brands are very interested in their heritage as well. So Cartier was extremely sympathetic and welcoming when I was doing the research. And then, of course, communicating with fellow scholars like Francesca, for example. But it's something that sets off your imagination, that really gets the ball rolling. And for me, one of the pieces was this fantastic ruby necklace worn by the Maharaja of Nawanagar, Digvijay Singh Ji, which was designed by Cartier in, I think it was the late 30s. And it's a iconic piece of jewelry. And I spent many, many, many years trying to find it, trying to track it down, as with the case of the Patiala jewelry. And, so these are ongoing quests, but you leave no stone unturned in your attempt to kind of get information on these wonderful treasures.
That sounds really effort consuming. I'm sure it takes years for you to track down, these pieces, or like the history behind them.
It's a lifelong passion, I think, for all of us on this screen, all of us on this call. It's something that doesn't end. Oftentimes things take years and years and years before they reveal themselves, let's say.
Radhika, speaking of, the confluence of techniques and, the mixing of cultures, would you have anything to share from your personal, your family's collection that would exemplify this, that would, that has brought together cultures in some way?
Absolutely. The most famous piece would be the Baroda pearl carpet, which was completely done up in Arabesque style, and it was a hangover of the Mughal and the Persian style of setting and embellishment, and it was done very much in Baroda, so which was the Maratha state. So the Marathas had a hangover of the Mughal way of the opulence and the understanding carried over, because the same gem cutters, gem setters all came down as the Mughal Empire disintegrated onto the other rising powers within the country. And of course the European influence was very much there as well. We have a beautiful tiara by Cartier, which we spoke about in the talk, and many other jewelry which was made, commissioned by international jewelry houses, and were reset again later by the Harry Winstons and Van Cleef and Arpels again in the 30s and 40s by Sita Devi. So yes, there was a constant conversation that was happening with jewelry. You were taking it forward and reinventing it with the times, making it it fitting into your context as royalty started traveling abroad, and it became less ceremonial and more about the galas in when they were abroad. The jewelry became lighter and became more to do with the colors and palettes of or the textiles which were being worn. So when the chiffon started to be worn, the jewelry became more shimmery but lighter setting, and the gold heavy setting which was worn earlier kind of waned away when the zaris and the heavier silks and cotton saris were not being worn abroad as much. So it kind of the fashion and traditions and the styles all went together. It's very interesting if one looks at it that way.
Francesca, can you tell us about any iconic pieces that your ancestors have made that bring together French and Indian techniques?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Amin said was totally was really helpful for Cartier. What Amin was saying earlier about the Indian being the Indian rulers liking something that was kind of almost more Western in style, and the Western clients like looking to India in kind of admiration, because Cartier kind of was able to use that and as I say, create pieces like the Patiala necklace or many other pieces for the Indian rulers, but also then for its Western clients, use those Indian themes and ideas and bring them back and create pieces that were Indian inspired. And the most obvious example, of course, are the pieces that are now known as the Tutti Frutti jewels, so when Jack was in India, his diaries are full of his he's amazed at the colours all around him. That's what he can't get over, and he writes like, in India one does not see as in under the English sunlight. Everywhere it's just this brightness, and of course you all know that because this is like you've been brought up there. But I totally, when I went to India for the first time, I totally saw what he meant. It's like, wow, there's this explosion of colour, and I think that's what he was trying to replicate on a very small scale in those jewels he made for his clients in Europe and America, by putting together the rubies, the sapphires, the emeralds, the diamonds all together. And that was really quite groundbreaking at the time in the West, because the fashion at the time was for much more monochrome pieces, either just pearls or pearls and diamonds, maybe emeralds and diamonds, maybe sapphires and diamonds, but to have that mix of colours was quite rebellious, and as a result it became very popular with some of the big trendsetters of the day, people like Daisy Fellows, and of course Daisy Fellows' Collier Indu, the big Cartier necklace that she bought in the 1930s, which was said to have been inspired in fact by the Maharaja of Patna's necklace, which Cartier made for the Maharaja the previous year. And Daisy Fellows then had her brightly coloured necklace in 1936. But interestingly, as we were saying at the beginning, her one included sapphires, whereas the Maharaja's version hadn't had any sapphires in, sapphire being considered an unlucky colour.
Francesca, so we're talking about history and history of royal jewelry, and that forms a strong part of some of your webinars which you've started during the pandemic. Is there a topic that you're most passionate about, that you love talking about in your webinars? Could you actually tell us a bit more about your webinars in general?
Well, the webinars was kind of unexpectedly a result of this terrible pandemic, because obviously the world pressed pause and we're all stuck at home, and rather than traveling around and giving talks, I thought I'd do them from home, and I thought I could do them each time with a different expert or someone I'd met on my research journey, because Amin was speaking earlier about the excitement of the detective work of research, and I really felt like that over the 10 years I was researching my book, and I met so many great people along the way who opened up a little, like, it's like pieces of a puzzle, isn't it? I had my own pieces of the puzzle from my archives, but some of them didn't make total sense until I met someone else. Like when I went to Baroda and met Radhikaraje, we could kind of put together the sketch with the jewel, and it all made sense. So I thought it would be fun to take the viewers on that kind of detective journey with me, and dive into a particular part of the history with one of the experts I met. So we did one on India and the Baroda royal family and their links with the Cartiers, which was really, really fun. And it wasn't just about the Cartier jewels, but just diving into the history more generally, because I think that's really important. It's kind of what we're talking about, isn't it? Is that, you know, Jacques Cartier, those Cartier pieces for the Maharajas and for the Western clients, they didn't just come from nowhere. They came from his experiences and his travels, and so to be able to walk in his footsteps, for me to be able to walk in his footsteps and see what he had seen and speak to the descendants of those people that he had spoken to and understand the world through their eyes, it makes everything suddenly makes more sense, and it's fun to share that with others. And so I've done different webinars, one with Radhikaraje, of course, but I've also one about the Cartiers and the Romanovs with Prince Dmitry, a descendant of Catherine the Great, and I've done one with, you know, some of the big American clients like Marjorie Merriweather Post with curator of her museum, her collection in the museum in Washington. And what you realise the more you do is that how all of these stories are connected, and that's really fun as well. Like the jewels, because each jewel tells its own story. It's rarely in the same hands forever. It gets passed around either down the generations, or it gets passed as the world goes through cataclysmic world events, from World War to the Great Depression. Jewels have to be sold, of course, and then they end up in another family. And so doing writing my book and doing the webinars is a way of following these jewels through time as well, which I've really enjoyed.
Lovely. Sorry. In your book, The Cartiers, do you have any favorite stories pertaining to Indian royal and, you know, your ancestors or your great grandfather?
Yeah, well, my grandfather spoke. It was my great grandfather who went to India, but my grandfather grew up with his father often on trips to India. But he also grew up meeting the Maharajas who would come to England, and the one they knew the best was Ranji, the Maharaja of Nawanagar, who was a very good friend with Jacques. And he would come and stay with them in that family house in Dorking, just outside London, or the Cartiers, my grandfather and his siblings, when they were little kids, they would go and spend summer holidays with Ranji and his Irish estate in Ballynainch. And so that was really interesting, finding out the personal stories about that. And in fact, one of the pieces that Jack was most proud of making was an incredible diamond necklace for Ranji. And it took them 3 years because both Ranji and Jack loved gemstones. And this was, like, I think, at the root of their friendship. And they loved gemstones almost for their spiritual quality, not just it wasn't just a sign of wealth or power for them. It was a genuine love of the stone. And Nellie, Jack's wife, writes in the letters, those two are kind of locked in conversation about gemstones again, and they were just always there sharing their insights. And so Jack created this incredible necklace for Ranji, and they spent 3 years choosing all the best diamonds that they could find. And Jack said, actually, it was made in 1931, it was finished, and he said at no other period in the whole of history can he imagine this necklace having been created, because the only reason they were able to get so many incredible diamonds in together at one time was because the world had experienced, a world war and a depression, and that had shaken up the wealth, and obviously many of the European royal families, and of course the Russian Grand Duchesses, many of them had been forced to sell their diamonds, so they'd come to the market, and so these incredible diamonds could be reunited in this one necklace, and it had a cascade of coloured diamonds down the bottom, and it was a piece that Jack was most proud of. He called it the realisation of a connoisseur's dream, and so yeah, it was lovely kind of finding out those stories.
I mean, you have something to say on this?
Well, just that I'm in huge admiration of the both panelists because they're doing extraordinary work, each in her own domain. But with Francesca, it's particularly fascinating, I must say, because of the archival material that she's been able to dig up. The dialogue face to face between Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji of Nawanagar and Jacques Cartier is kind of a legend because they produced together these remarkable pieces of jewelry of extraordinary scale, with really significant gemstones. The Maharaja was considered to really have the qualities and the aptitude of a professional gemologist. He was able to value gems very, very well. He loved them. He would always walk around with loose stones. And he was passionate. Often he could not always afford what he wanted. So he was also buying and selling and was commissioning these extraordinary things like the colored diamond necklace, which Francesca mentions, which didn't last very long. It was broken up. It didn't have a long life because it contains objects, gems of such value that the Maharaja, in fact, couldn't hold all that wealth in the form of the necklace. Um, as both Radhikaraje and Francesca have said, the turning over of diamonds, I think, is something that's really significant. We must remember that through World War One, when the Russians and then the German royal houses, Austria-Hungary, all collapsed, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. It was with diamonds that royal families fled and left. And this is what they could take with them, which they could then sell piece by piece in order to survive and make their new lives. And in this way, great gemstones and great diamonds reappeared on the market, and they found new owners, like Barbara Hutton, like Marjorie Merriweather Post, etc. And we must remember the Maharajas were so significant because through the 20s and the 30s, after the Russian Revolution, after the Great Depression, they remained buyers. And this is why we see such extraordinary things that were made for them at a time when the market was flooded with extraordinary gemstones.
Yeah, it's true. I think the Indian clients really, in the Great Depression, they really helped keep Cartier afloat because, America was not really buying in the same way. France wasn't. England, you had the coronation in England in the 1930s, which led to a bit of a boost of sales, but generally people were resetting their old pieces rather than buying new, whereas the Indian clients through the 1930s were, I think, they really helped keep Cartier afloat, really.
And while India is a natural source of diamonds, historically the most important one, families like Baroda, like Nawanagar, like Patiala, etc., they were also, like Indore, they were also sourcing and buying international diamonds through their trusted jewelers in London and in Paris. So, for example, Indore, the famous Indore pears were acquired through Chaumet. So you have these top European firms that are then sourcing diamonds from South Africa, from Russia, from different places, but they end up in Indian jewelry. And this is also a really super exciting period.
Absolutely, like we have the Empress Eugenie diamond, which was believed to be of belonging to Empress Eugenie, and before that Empress Catherine. So yes, these stones had a long history, and it was where they ended up coming from and where they ended up. The journey continues. I think diamonds have their own destiny, and they switch many hands. And I think while they are with you, they really do add value to your collection.
We've spoken about so many stones that have changed hands, and in the time that they've been around, which has been centuries. Could you all tell me about some of the stories of these stones, like where they originated from to where they are now?
Well, if you don't mind if I start, it's probably with one of the diamonds that is best known, which is the Kohinoor. And this is a diamond which must have always been an incredibly important one because of its scale. And it has a great early history. When Babur comes to India, he's presented it. And it remains in the Mughal treasury. It's in the peacock throne of Shah Jahan. It is then, when it's looted, in 1739, the stone goes to Iran with Nadir Shah. It then comes into the hands of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who was wearing it as a bazuband. And when the Sikh Empire is conquered by the British in 1849, the stone is taken to England and is presented to Queen Victoria. Of course, it was very large. It was like a dome with the faceting on the outside. And this did not equate with the British 19th century idea of a diamond and how to realize the sparkle of a diamond. So the Kohinoor is completely cut down. Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, is actually quite gemologically interested and designs jewelry a little bit, and he gets involved in the reshaping of the diamond, which reduces it very substantially, but enhances its sparkle. And ever since then, it's been in the British Crown Jewels. But what's extraordinary is that the models exist for the original setting, the original stone, and then of course we see the finished product. And so you can really see how attitudes towards cutting gems were so different at the time between India, where size was valued a lot, and shimmer, this gentle shimmer, was really valued, and the West, where it wasn't so much about size, but it was about the sparkle and the geometry and the symmetry of the stone.
Radhika, over to you.
A lot of stones in history, but if I talk about the Baroda Collection, like I mentioned, the Star of the South, very interesting story. It was found by, in Brazil by a slave woman, and it changed the history of her life. She was given an early release from slavery, and the town came to be known by the stone. And then how it arrived in Baroda, it was set up, like I said, in a silk aigrette, and there was a whole procession that it's said to have taken place in the city by the Maharaja Khanderao, to flaunt that the diamond. And then over time, it was set into as a single individual piece in a necklace, and then as the triple tier diamond necklace, and then it just depending on who was wearing it, or so even whether if it was in one particular family, they were being recut and set to the mood of an individual. So it's nice to see the transition of a stone and see it being worn differently.
Do some of these still belong in your personal collection?
No, they've long fled. They've long flown away, like all important stones do.
Yeah. Francesca, what about you?
Well, I mean, I think we've spoken about quite a lot of the iconic jewelry, but in terms of iconic diamonds and well-known stones, I think one of the best well-known ones that passed through my ancestors' hands is probably the cursed Hope diamond, which was this blue diamond that was supposedly cursed, and apparently because it was taken from an eye of an Indian temple god, and all the owners that owned it were said to have suffered terrible fates. But this didn't stop Pierre Cartier, who was Jacques' older brother, from buying it and convincing, after a while, one of his American clients to buy it. Well, she didn't need much convincing. She rather liked Evelyn Walsh McLean. She liked big stones and she liked making a statement. And she had this cursed diamond for many years, and she would have parties where it was called the Hope diamond. She would hide the hope, or she would tie it around the neck of her, and she'd hide the hope in the garden, and all the guests would have to go and find it, or she'd tie it around the neck of her dog as a statement. And this one diamond was like so important for Cartier in terms of making Cartier's name in New York, because Cartier didn't really believe at that stage in advertising. It believed in word of mouth, and of course, because this was one of the most famous stones in America, it was in all the gossip columns and the newspapers, and it was always referred to it that she'd bought it from Cartier. So Cartier went from being totally unknown in America to becoming linked with this stone, and then unfortunately she never believed in the curse, but quite a lot of bad luck did come her way. She ended up her husband left her, and two of her children died, I think. It was a terrible story. And then at the end of her life, the hope now is in the Smithsonian Museum. So that's another example of it, kind of this iconic stone passing through different hands, different countries, and now it attracts millions of visitors every year, I think, in the Smithsonian Museum. So the lure of the diamond continues.
Thank you to to Amin, Francesca, and Radhika for joining us today. This was such a wonderful and insightful session. There are so many incredible stories that you shared with us, and I'm sure our audiences enjoyed it as much as I did. As a final question, I would like to ask each one of you to tell our audiences what you think was the most iconic natural diamond commission made by an Indian royal.
I think I've already mentioned it, the triple tier diamond necklace, because of the magnificence of the diamonds in it and the entire suite. Yeah, I would say that.
I mean, iconic's a funny word because it's things change in time, don't I? But I think I would have to go with the just because how important it was to my great grandfather, the Nawanagar diamond necklace, because that to him was really the peak of his career.
Amin, what about you?
I have to say, I'm sorry to be so predictable, but I would have to say that it's the extraordinary Patiala necklace designed by Cartier for Maharaja Fatesingh of Patiala, with triple rows of diamonds with the big yellow diamond in the middle, the rubies, etc., marrying the best of the Patiala diamond treasury with pieces that the royal family had acquired from different sources over the years. Eversugeny is another source that's mentioned. So I would say it's the Patiala diamond necklace. It's now in the permanent collection of Cartier, the replica of it, but it's even the replica is absolutely dazzling. It's one of the greatest pieces of jewelry ever imagined and ever created.
Thank you to our lovely panelists and all our audiences who are joining us from their homes. Keep watching Vogue India's social channels for more from Vogue India and the Natural Diamond Council's Diamond Festival, the online edit.